Remember when time travel meant a stainless steel DeLorean, a glowing flux capacitor, and one very specific rule? You hit 88 miles an hour, or you're not going anywhere? Well, Back to the Future dropped us into Hill Valley with Marty McFly, a regular suburban kid played by Michael J. Fox, and his wild-haired, sleep-deprived genius of a best friend, Doc Brown, brought to life by Christopher Lloyd. Toss in Leah Thompson as Marty's future mom Lorraine, Crispin Glover as the wonderfully awkward George McFly, and Thomas F. Wilson as the human headache known as Biff Tannen. And you have one of the most rewatchable movie casts of the 1980s. Now, when the film landed in theaters in 1985 from Universal Pictures, it became a hit and part of the culture. Suddenly, everybody knew what a flux capacitor was. Everyone wanted a DeLorean, and every kid with a skateboard felt at least a little cooler. But today we're going to head back to Hill Valley for 15 weird facts that you probably didn't know about Back to the Future. The casting drama, behind-the-scenes chaos, and the little details that somehow make this movie even better. But before we go messing with the space-time continuum, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with the friend who still says, "Great Scott!" on purpose.
Great Scott!
All right, let's get into the countdown. Number 15, Eric Stoltz was fired after 6 weeks of filming. Now, Eric Stoltz had the role of a lifetime until, well, he didn't. The talented method actor was cast as Marty McFly and filmed for 6 weeks before getting the boot. And honestly, it really wasn't his fault. He was just spectacularly the wrong guy for the job. Stoltz treated every scene like he was auditioning for the actor's studio. Intense, brooding, committed to capital R realism. By some accounts, Stoltz saw Marty's story as a tragedy. The kid gets a better life in the new 1985, but he loses the original family that he knew. That's deep, right? Well, sure, but Back to the Future wasn't really a meditation on loss and identity. It's a time-traveling romp where a teenager has to make sure that his parents fall in love. Now, here's the thing. Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale wanted Michael J. Fox from day one, but Fox was chained to family ties and couldn't escape. So they rolled the dice on Stoltz, figuring that his dramatic chops could translate to comedy. Spoiler, they couldn't. Now, after watching the dailies, Zemeckis realized that they had a problem. Stoltz's performance was so serious and methodical that it drained all the fun out of the movie. And his commitment to realism, it went hard. During the cafeteria fight scene, he allegedly shoved Tom Wilson, who played Biff, so hard that he nearly broke the guy's collarbone. Not out of anger, that's just what Stoltz thought the character needed. 6 weeks in, Zemeckis, he pulled the plug. They reworked Fox's schedule so he could shoot Family Ties by day and the movie at night. The decision cost around $3 million and meant reshooting nearly every scene that Stoltz had done. But Fox's wired running on fumes energy, that became the Marty McFly that we all loved. Stoltz walked away with a paycheck, a story nobody believed at first, and almost no footage left to prove any of it happened. Fox walked away with a career-defining role. Number 14, the time machine was almost a refrigerator. Before the DeLorean became the most famous stainless steel car in cinematic history, Doc Brown's time machine was supposed to be originally a refrigerator. Yeah, a fridge. In the earliest drafts, Marty McFly would drive a truck carrying a lead-lined Frigidaire to a Nevada nuclear test site. He'd climb into the fridge and then wait for an atomic bomb to blast him through time. It sounded wild until, again, Robert or Bob Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg realized that kids might actually try this. Old refrigerators with latching doors were total suffocation traps, and kids had actually died climbing into abandoned ones. So, yeah, maybe not the best plot device. So Zemeckis pivoted to something mobile, a car. Way more cinematic, way better for chase scenes, and way less likely to end in a lawsuit. It also saved him from a budget disaster. The nuclear finale would have required building an entire fake desert town just to blow it up, a spectacle their modest budget had zero chance of affording. Instead, they got the clock tower lightning strike. It was cheaper, safer, way more emotional. Being forced to get creative gave us one of the most beloved endings in movie history. So, the car it was, and not just any car. Ford entered with the reported $75,000 offer, waving it around like a flag and begging the filmmakers to make it a Mustang. But Bob Gale delivered one of Hollywood's greatest rejections. Doc Brown doesn't drive an effing Mustang. The DeLorean DMC-12 won the role instead. Gull-wing doors, brushed stainless steel body, the whole futuristic package. To 1950s characters, it looked like a UFO. To 1980s audiences, it looked like the coolest thing that they'd ever seen, even if the actual car couldn't outrun a determined jogger. Number 13, they stole Crispin Glover's face and got sued. Crispin Glover played George McFly in the original Back to the Future, the awkward, nerdy dad who somehow becomes a cool, successful author by the end. But when the sequel rolls around, Glover was nowhere to be found. Why? Well, 2 reasons. First, Glover had serious problems with the first film's ending. He felt that it was too materialistic, rewarding the McFlys with wealth and success rather than focusing on genuine human connection. Bob Zemeckis was not interested in the notes. Second, money. Glover wanted a paycheck that was considerably closer to what Michael J. Fox was making. Ain't that interesting? The guy who thought the movie was too focused on wealth also wanted more of it. The producers decided that he wasn't essential enough to the franchise to meet those terms, and that was that. And the filmmakers? Well, they replaced him with actor Jeffrey Wiseman and just decided to pretend Glover was still there. So, yeah, it got kind of weird. It turned out that during the first film, a mold had been made of Glover's face for aging makeup. So they dug it up, they slapped those prosthetics on Wiseman, and hoped that nobody would notice. They filmed Wiseman from behind, at a distance, even upside down. Anything to hide the fact that he was an actual different guy. They also reused actual footage of Glover from the first movie without asking or paying him. Glover sued, and he won. The lawsuit settled out of court for a reported $760,000, but the real impact went beyond the check. The Screen Actors Guild added new clauses to their collective bargaining agreement prohibiting filmmakers from recreating an actor's likeness through prosthetics, old footage, or any other method, including AI, without the actor's permission. So today, with CGI and AI deepfakes running wild, Glover's case, way more relevant than ever. Hollywood tried to steal his face, and Glover made him pay for it. Number 12, the movie was almost called Spaceman from Pluto. Imagine walking into a theater in 1985, handing over your $4, and sitting down to watch Spaceman from Pluto. Yeah, that's not a joke. That was the real title suggestion from Sid Sheinberg, head of Universal Pictures, who apparently woke up one morning and decided that Back to the Future sounded like box office poison. He believed that no hit movie had ever used the word future. It was too sci-fi, too B-movie, too unmarketable. His brilliant title alternative? Spaceman from Pluto, pulled from a comic book clutched by a terrified farm kid after Marty crashes into a barn wearing a radiation suit in 1955. Oh, and while he was at it, Sheinberg also suggested swapping out Doc's dog Einstein for a chimp. The writers, Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis, panicked and did what any sensible Hollywood types would do. They called in Steven Spielberg to handle the situation. And Spielberg? Oh, Spielberg was a genius. He sent Sheinberg a note thanking him for his, quote, humorous memo, saying that they all got a good laugh out of it. Playing it off like the studio head was obviously kidding was such a ridiculous suggestion. The executive, now thoroughly embarrassed that his serious idea was being treated as comedy, dropped it immediately and never mentioned Spaceman from Pluto again. One note. That's all it took. One sly note from Spielberg, and Spaceman from Pluto stayed exactly where it belonged. In the trash. Number 11. The DeLorean was too slow for its own movie. The DeLorean DMC-12 had one thing going for it. It looked like something that aliens would drive, and that's exactly what the script needed. Speed? Not so much. With a stainless steel body and gull-wing doors, it had the aesthetic, but what it didn't have was horsepower. The real car's V6 engine produced a pretty pathetic 130 horsepower and took over 9 seconds to go from 0 to 60 miles an hour. It could technically hit 88 miles an hour, but getting there required a running start, a really long stretch of road, and maybe some divine intervention too. So the sound team did what any self-respecting movie crew would do. They lied. They swapped the DeLorean's wimpy engine whine for the deep guttural growl of a Porsche 928's V8. And if you listen closely, there's also a little Star Wars land speeder mixed in there, giving it the cinematic bite that it never earned on the road. That's movie magic, baby. Now, after the film's release, something unexpected happened. The car, whose company had already gone bankrupt by 1982, suddenly became a collector's dream. Fans started buying conversion kits to turn their DeLoreans into time machine replicas, complete with flux capacitors, Mr. Fusion units, and all the glowing doodads that Doc Brown cobbled together in his garage. Even John DeLorean himself was moved. He wrote to Zemeckis and Gale personally, saying, quote, "Last week I had the opportunity to see a screening of Back to the Future in New York, and want you to know that I think it was absolutely brilliant. I was particularly pleased that the DeLorean motor car was all but immortalized in the film. Not bad for a car that couldn't outrun a determined jogger." Number 10. Hill Valley's Courthouse Square has been in dozens of movies. Now, Hill Valley might feel like a real small town, but it's actually one of Hollywood's hardest working sets, like that one actor who shows up in every Netflix show playing a different cop. The Courthouse Square on Universal's backlot first gained fame as Mockingbird Square in To Kill a Mockingbird. A year before Back to the Future, it was Kingston Falls in Gremlins, where the little monsters tore the place apart. Yet through the 80s, it would show up constantly on Knight Rider, and it later became Grandview on Ghost Whisperer. Although the production team did cover the clock tower up completely, so audiences wouldn't make the connection. The set has survived 2 major fires, in 1990 and 2008, and it's been rebuilt each time, which is why eagle-eyed fans will notice the buildings look slightly different over the years. But that famous courthouse clock It's still there, and it's still ticking. Today, it's a highlight of the Universal Studios tour, where visitors can stand exactly where the DeLorean left those flaming tire tracks and pretend that they're about to accidentally erase themselves from existence. Number 9, the Reagan joke made everyone nervous. That was one of the funniest lines in Back to the Future, but it also made the filmmakers sweat bullets. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale just roasted a sitting president, one who happened to be a former Hollywood actor. What if he hated it? What if it blew up in their faces? The film made its way to a private White House screening, and the filmmakers basically held their breath. Turns out, Reagan thought it was hilarious. According to aides, he laughed so hard at the Jerry Lewis joke that he made the projectionist stop the film and rewind it so he could watch it again. He even quoted Doc Brown in his 1986 State of the Union address. The President of the United States addressing Congress, quoting a mad scientist from a time travel comedy. That's peak 1980s. There was one awkward moment during the screening, though, when Doc sarcastically suggested, "I suppose Jane Wyman is the First Lady," referring to Reagan's ex-wife. The room got real quiet real fast. Yeah, Nancy Reagan, she wasn't a fan of that one. Number 8, Michael J. Fox trained like a rock star. When Marty McFly tore into Johnny B. Goode at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, Michael J. Fox trained like he was about to headline Madison Square Garden. Fox worked with Hollywood guitar coach Paul Hansen to nail every finger placement, chord change, and fret position. He got so confident in his playing that he told Zemeckis to feel free to cut to his hands at any time. He'd have it covered. And it wasn't just about the guitar. Fox also worked with choreographer Brad Jeffries to capture that wild rock and roll energy, pulling moves from legends like Pete Townsend, Chuck Berry, and Jimi Hendrix. The performance was so convincing that most people assumed that Fox was actually playing and singing. He wasn't. Musician Tim May handled the guitar, and Mark Campbell, a member of the soul and R&B band Jack Mack and the Heart Attack, provided the vocals. Campbell wasn't even credited. The production wanted to sell the illusion completely. He did eventually get a small percentage of the soundtrack revenue, which is at least something. But Fox's commitment sold every second of it. Watching him shred that cherry red Gibson ES-345 on stage, you'd absolutely believe that he could rock a high school gym into the ground. And for the trivia lovers out there, the Gibson ES-345 couldn't have actually existed in 1955. Gibson didn't design the model until 1958. Marty McFly accidentally inventing rock and roll and playing a guitar that didn't quite exist yet. That's a classic. Air guitar, anyone? All right, quick question. If you had Doc Brown's DeLorean for one joyride, where would you go first? Drop your answer below, and while you're down there, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more than 1.21 gigawatts of electricity. Now, back to the countdown. Number 7, they had 9 weeks to finish post-production. After Back to the Future's test screenings in mid-May of 1985, Universal executive Sid Sheinberg made a bold and pretty genuinely chaotic call. At one screening in Long Beach, 99% of the audience rated the film excellent or very good. So Sheinberg moved the release date from August to July 3rd to capture the lucrative 4th of July box office window. Smart marketing play, but a logistical nightmare. The film was originally scheduled for August specifically to give the team more time for complex special effects work. The new date, well, it cut that timeline to just 9 weeks. Robert Zemeckis and his post-production team worked around the clock, racing to finish effect sequences that normally would take months. Some shots were completed at the absolute last minute, and it shows if you look closely. Bob Gale later admitted that certain visuals still bother him because they simply ran out of time to perfect them. Eagle-eyed viewers have long claimed to spot rush details in certain DeLorean shots, and the dashboard time circuit display has been noted as visibly rough around the edges. But the gamble, it paid off. The film's visuals still earned rave reviews, and the July debut helped it become the highest-grossing movie of 1985 worldwide, raking in more than $381 million. Number 6, the script was rejected 40 times. Now, before it became the highest-grossing film of 1985, Back to the Future was the script that nobody wanted. It was turned down more than 40 times. Disney rejected it because of the plot where Marty's teenage mom developed a crush on him, not knowing that he's her future son. A Disney exec called it too dirty. Never mind that the whole thing resolves with zero actual romance, but it was still too spicy for the Mouse House. But other studios rejected it for the opposite reason. The early 80s were ruled by raunchy teen comedies. Porky's, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Revenge of the Nerds. Executives took one look at Back to the Future and dismissed it as too clean, too wholesome, not edgy enough to compete with the decade's raunchy box office juggernauts. Plus, the conventional wisdom at the time was that time travel movies simply didn't make money. Too dirty for Disney, too innocent for everyone else. The script was stuck in a cultural no man's land. The breakthrough came when Robert Zemeckis scored a hit with Romancing the Stone in 1984, which suddenly made him bankable. Universal Pictures finally took the gamble, and Steven Spielberg signed on as executive producer through his company, Amblin Entertainment. Turns out being too wholesome That's not a bug. It was the feature every other studio was too cynical to recognize. 40 plus passes, and Universal got the hit. Number 5, Biff's dumbest line was never actually in the script. Thomas F. Wilson knew exactly who Biff Tannen was, and apparently, so did Biff. Wilson came up with his character's most memorable line himself. The original expression is, "make like a tree and leave," which is a pun that actually kind of works. Biff, well, of course, he butchered it. And that was perfect, because it captured everything about him. Loud, dumb, and blissfully unaware that he was an idiot. And it wasn't just the tree line. Wilson also improvised the word butthead on set. One guy and 2 of the most quoted insults of the entire decade. You're welcome, 1985. The payoff came years later in Back to the Future Part 2, when old Biff traveled back to 1955 and heard his younger self mangle the same phrase all over again. And he finally snapped. It's "make like a tree and leave." You sound like a damn fool when you say it wrong. Old Biff correcting young Biff for a line that was never supposed to exist in the first place. I mean, that's the kind of callback that makes a trilogy feel like it was planned down to the last syllable, even when it wasn't. Number 4, a high school yearbook sparked the entire idea. Back to the Future started in a flooding basement in St. Louis, with a yearbook and a question that nobody ever thought to ask. In August of 1980, screenwriter Bob Gale was visiting his parents when a local flood sent him digging through the basement, rescuing anything worth saving. Buried in the chaos was his father's 1940 high school yearbook, one that Gale had never seen before. Flipping through it, he discovered that his dad, Mark Gale, had been president of his graduating class. He had no idea. Gale thought about his own high school's class president, someone that he had little respect for, and suddenly realized that his father had been way cooler than he'd ever imagined. That single thought was all it took. Would he have been friends with his dad if they had gone to high school together? Well, he came back to California and told the idea to Bob Zemeckis, who loved it immediately, and immediately made it better. Zemeckis added the wrinkle about the mom. What if she'd always claimed to be a good girl in high school, but wasn't? Suddenly, they had a movie. The two began building a story that used time travel to explore family dynamics and identity. No laser battles, no dystopian futures, just a kid realizing that his parents were once young, awkward, and deeply uncool. All of it from a waterlogged basement in Missouri. Number 3, The Power of Love wasn't written for the movie. When the filmmakers first approached Huey Lewis in the news about contributing to Back to the Future, Lewis had reservations. He'd never written for a film before and didn't really know what it entailed. And the idea of writing a song literally called Back to the Future, yeah, hard pass. There was also a second hesitation that nobody talks about much. Lewis thought that it was a kids' movie. The band was riding high with a string of hits and wasn't sure that a film soundtrack was where they wanted to be. But the filmmakers, Zemeckis, Gale, Spielberg, they were all ahead of him. And they didn't want a title track. They didn't want a brief. They just wanted whatever the band wrote next, because Marty McFly was written as a Huey Lewis superfan. The character literally listens to the band in the opening scene. That's how deep Huey Lewis and the News were baked into the DNA of the film. Hey, and worth noting, it was score composer Alan Silvestri who first suggested Lewis to the filmmakers. Lewis agreed in the room. Whatever song the band wrote next, they'd send it down. That song turned out to be The Power of Love. The lyrics had nothing to do with time travel, flux capacitors, or DeLoreans. It was a straightforward anthem about emotional strength, but it fit perfectly. Energetic, upbeat, pure Huey Lewis. The song became a massive hit. It climbed to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and earned an Academy Award nomination. The band later wrote a second song for the film, Back in Time, which played over the closing credits and actually referenced the plot. But The Power of Love was the one that stuck. As a cheeky inside joke, Lewis even appears in the movie as a talent show judge, cutting off Marty's band mid-performance and declares them just too darn loud. The man whose music defied the movie, telling the kid who worships his music that he's too loud. How about that? Number 2, there's never going to be a remake or sequel. In Hollywood, most creators will just sell their projects to the studio, cash the check, and watch helplessly as executives reboot everything 30 years later. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale said, absolutely not, and they made it legally binding. When they signed their original 1984 deal with Universal and Amblin Entertainment, they secured contractual approval over any future sequels or reboots. And that protection lasts as long as they're alive. No sequel, no reboot, no reimagining can happen without their explicit sign-off. And they've spent 4 decades refusing every offer. Why? Well, they believe the trilogy already tells a complete story. There's nothing left to say. Plus, Michael J. Fox can't play Marty McFly anymore due to his Parkinson's disease, and neither of them wants to see anyone else in the role. Gale's been blunt about it. Without Fox, there's no Marty, and without Marty, there's no movie. Full stop. Zemeckis has compared remaking Back to the Future to remaking Citizen Kane, an act of pure folly that nobody asked for and nobody needs. Gale has called any fourth film a cheap cash grab. Plain and simple. Universal keeps coming back with new offers. Zemeckis has joked that it happens like clockwork, but the answer always know. The one exception, Back to the Future, the musical, which let them revisit the story in a new medium without touching the films themselves. And after they're gone, Zemeckis has been clear. Once he and Gale are no longer around, Universal will almost certainly move forward. He's only hoping that their estates can stop it. For now, Back to the Future remains one of the few untouched franchises in modern cinema. 3 movies perfectly preserved, exactly as fans remember them. Number 1, Doc Brown's hunch started as a camera solution. Christopher Lloyd stands at 6'1", and Michael J. Fox, 5'5". That significant height gap created real problems for framing their scenes together. You can't just put 2 actors in a shot when one towers over the other like a mad scientist giraffe. So Lloyd did something practical. He hunched. Leaning forward and stooping down pulled both actors into the same frame without camera tricks or forced perspective. Problem solved. But something interesting happened in the process. That stoop posture became Doc Brown. The hunch gave him a restless kinetic energy, like his thoughts were moving so fast that his body could barely keep up. A practical fix turned into a defining character choice. And the hunch wasn't the only thing that Lloyd brought to the role. He modeled Doc's wild white hair on 2 very specific inspirations: Albert Einstein and legendary Philadelphia orchestra conductor Leopold Stokowski. Between the hair, the hunch, and Christopher Lloyd's unhinged commitment to the character, Doc Brown became one of the most recognizable figures in cinema history. All of it. Every twitch, every wild-eyed stare, every frantic gesture. It started with a guy trying to fit into a camera frame. And there you have it, everyone. 15 weird facts about Back to the Future. Which one surprised you the most, and which one takes you right back to the first time you watched Marty light up that parking lot? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this trip back to Hill Valley, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's still convinced that this is one of the best movies of the 80s. Until next time, this is Remember When.